The End. First added in 2011 for release 1.0, it's had a few minor tweaks over the years, the only significant update being in 2016 with version 1.9 adding the outer islands, cities and chorus plants, but that was nearly 8 years ago, closer to the End's first appearance in the game than now. Nothing major has happened with it since, and it's overdue. There is no variation in the terrain, just constant islands covered in enderman and chorus plants, with the occasional random unexplained city. These aspects don't fit together as well as the other dimensions. There's no ecosystems, in fact there's very little life at all, which makes it very boring to explore. You don't go to the end unless you have to. You fight the dragon, grab an elytra, and only return to collect more shulker shells if you need them. I'm not going to talk about the end dragon fight, although it is a little underwhelming. It's really the outer end that I think needs changes. So what needs to happen to it? Well, fortunately we have a blueprint in the form of 1.16, the Nether update. Before that, the Nether was much like the End is now. It was dull and empty and lifeless, but now it's full of life and interesting things to go find. I think the main things that they added to the Nether can be categorised into a few broad topics: biomes, mobs, structures and atmosphere. Biomes is pretty self-explanatory. The Nether kept the old Nether as the Nether Wastes, but they added the Warp and Crimson Forest, the Basalt Delta and the Salt Sand Valley. The End needs the same treatment. The current End biome can stay as a chorus forest biome, but there needs to be more. For the Crimson and Warped Forests, they got their own grassy netherrack types, and while the End doesn't need two grasses, an End grass with an equivalent to the small roots found in the Nether would go a long way to bringing more life and variety to the End by having a texture other than cheese. I'm imagining a biome with some kind of large tree-like plants, a bit like Chorus but distinctly different because there's already way too much Chorus plants. Then maybe a biome with more interesting terrain generation, equivalent to Basalt Deltas, and maybe a biome with a new block type with interesting properties along the lines of the Salt Sand Valley. Next up is mobs. Currently there's only endermen everywhere and shulkers in cities. That's worse than the pre-1.16 Nether, and is not up to the level of the rest of the game. We can look to the Nether again for inspiration for this. The equivalent of endermen is sort of zombie pigmen, although they are not exactly comparable, and the equivalent of shulkers is all the fortress mobs, as they were the inhabitants of the only structure. But what was added to the Nether was mostly biome-specific mobs. Or more accurately, already existing mobs were given specific biomes, like magma slimes being moved to basalt deltas, skeletons going to the Salt Sand Valley and endermen to the Warped Forest. The other mobs, like striders and ghasts, are not biome specific, but location specific, as in on lava lakes in the air. What I'm getting at is the End needs new mobs, as there are so few to move to biomes, which can go in each of the new biomes. And in my opinion, an equivalent to the strider. Of course, that means something that traverses the main hazard of the End, the void. A slow, floating creature that the player can saddle and ride would not only reduce the tedium of bridging between islands, but would also fit in with the theme of the End. Another key feature of the Nether mobs is the ecosystem between piglins and hoglins. The interaction between them provides so much life to the Nether, as there is action happening regardless of the player, which the End very much doesn't have. Then comes structures. There's one. That is not good. Aside from the stuff on the main island for the boss fight, the only structure is the cities, and they are just towers. The idea of having cities is cool, and the towers themselves are fine, but they shouldn't be called cities. We can look again to the Nether for inspiration for this update. In the Nether, fortresses were retained from before 1.16, but they added bastions. The difference between the Nether and the End on this is that the Nether is enclosed, it has a roof and the terrain forms huge caverns, whereas the End is open without even a floor. This means that to fill the space, the End will need a lot more stuff than the Nether, more like the overworld, and one or two types of structure is not going to make it sufficiently full. It doesn't have to be completely filled with structures, that would ruin the vibe. However, occasional small structures would go a long way to make it more exciting to explore, and the main structures, currently just towers, need expanding to fill their name of city. There's already a build style provided by the current cities, but that needs expanding with new variants of End blocks, hopefully related to new biome-specific blocks, which the structures can be built out of. The End also lacks the story that overworld and Nether structures hint at. Ruined portals, ancient cities, trail ruins, strongholds, ocean monuments, bastion remnants, all give clues and lore to the Minecraft world, but in the end, there's just weird cities full of strange mobs, and zero clues as to how or why any of it exists. The structures of the other dimensions tell a story, not by any means a complete story, but they do tell of past civilizations and inhabitants of your world, but we know nothing about the history of the End. And finally is the atmosphere. Currently there is only one ambient track that plays in the End, and in fact overworld cave sounds play instead sometimes. There are no ambient particle effects like in the Nether, there is no weather, nothing changes at all. Obviously more ambient sounds and particle effects would come with an end update like in the Nether update. And really there is such little at the moment that there are many ways they could take the atmosphere depending on what vibe they want to develop the end into. But really the thing that would make the most improvement for the atmosphere is to have some more variation and detail in the textures, colours, biomes, mobs and terrain, instead of the same blobby islands covered in generally useless plants, endermen that are nothing more than an inconvenience, and the odd city tower. The end is so far behind the standards of the overworld and the Nether that I think it is highly likely that the end update is planned, maybe even for 1.22 or 1.23. Honestly, I think updating the end should be a higher priority than adding completely new stuff like the trial chambers coming at 1.21, and the theorised new dimension relating to the potential portal in ancient cities. I highly doubt Mojang will see this video, but you could help by leaving a like and sharing this message with your friends so that together we can persuade Mojang to give us a much needed rework of the end dimension. But thank you for watching, and goodbye.